So first of all, thank you very much for being part of World Hosting Days. You should introduce yourself to the audience and tell them who you are.
Thank you. So I'm Tatu Ylönen. I'm a techie and an entrepreneur. I started my company years ago, my first year at the university, but I still write code. And I was originally a database researcher, but then kind of have been doing security for a long time. Started SSH Communication Security, which is the company focusing around SSH and solutions around that. Recently wrote a document published by NIST, the US National Institute of Standards and Technology, on SSH key management, and very actively still working on issues around that, solving customer problems.
So for the non-tech, so we've got a mixture in the audience of both technical folks who will use SSH pretty much every day, and non-technical folks who it's just another acronym to them. Can you just in a few words sum up what the technology is, what it does, how it changed the world?
Yeah, so SSH is basically, it's a tool for encrypted connections over the internet, especially for system administration file transfers. It creates an encrypted tunnel between a client host and a server, and then within that encrypted tunnel, it can do terminal connections, graphical connections, file transfers, or basically forward any application data across that encrypted connection. It was the first practically usable tool for encrypted connections for system administration and file transfers.
And you say first, pretty much the most popular one we have, perhaps the only one that's really in regular use on pretty much every set of servers, every set of Linux servers at least in the world.
Yeah, I mean there's SSL, which is used for web traffic, and then there's SSH, which is used for system administration, file transfers, inside confirmation tools, and so on.
Everywhere?
SSH ships with every Unix and Linux machine, with the operating system, ships with every Mac. It ships in a number of phones, though you have to enable certain developer modes to actually see it. It's in almost every network device, in computer BIOSes for IPMI ports for managing platforms. It's in virtualization platforms like VMware. It's in all the layers everywhere, throughout the stack.
So 20 years ago when you were coming up with this, what was the problem you were solving? What was it that inspired you to... I mean, first of all, who were you at the time, 20 years ago?
So I was a database researcher, and we were having a bit of trouble publishing our results. I was a little frustrated. I had a company at that time which did information retrieval. And there was a hacker incident in the Finnish university network where they found a password sniffer, basically a program installed on a server that was connected direct to the backbone at that time. And it was listening for network traffic and recording all the usernames and passwords of the traffic that went in the university backbone. And when it was found, there were thousands of usernames and passwords in the database, including several from my company. And I started thinking, what can I do to not have to be afraid? How could I use the internet safely to log in from my home to my office or to the university and vice versa? And I knew nothing about cryptography. And I read a book on cryptography. I looked at PGP, read through its source code, and started learning about those things, started thinking, what should it do? Talked to some friends who came up with ideas on things like file transfers and port forwarding and X11 forwarding and so on. And 3 months after I started, I published the first version as open source. So that was July 95. And by the end of 95, I was getting 150 emails per day from people who wanted support for SSH. I was getting getting emails from places like University of California at Berkeley, wanting to buy commercial support for it. People were asking if they could start selling it.
So this is a question. I realize that open source is more of a philosophy than anything else, but is there ever a moment when you think, I could have sold this, I could have made a lot of money from the thing rather than the support around it?
Besides security issues, I had political motivations for doing SSH. So the security issue was real. Password sniffing was perhaps the most serious security issue on the internet back then. And basically, we solved that to a large extent. But that was also a time when there was a debate about cryptography overall, whether people should be allowed to use strong encryption, or whether at that time the US government would be allowed to listen into all the encryption systems. They were pushing the Clipper chip to...
We had Stuart Baker, who was from the NSA at that time.
So that they have backdoor into all communications. I do not think that a system where one party has access to all the information is stable long term. Sooner or later, it's going to be abused. And for that reason, I thought it was important, and particularly if you think of information systems, usernames and passwords, if you can listen into the traffic, you can see all the usernames and passwords and other access codes that go within all the network connections. It's not just about spying. It's about information warfare. It's about cyber warfare. If you can read all the passwords, you can break into any system, bring any system down anytime you want. And in trade negotiations or other important political, diplomatic engagements, having the power to shut down a country is pretty, without firing a single shot, is a powerful tool. And I don't think a system where certain parties are given free access to go in, subvert information, or outright destroy, wipe out systems by reprogramming the BIOS firmware and the hard drive firmware and reading backup tapes one at a time and overwriting the first 10 megabytes of each tape. I don't think that's a safe world, and I want to make the world safer. And if I look at how widely SSH is used today, it's everywhere. It's used for network management. The internet as we know is largely managed using SSH, by logging into routers using SSH. The hardware that runs in your data centers is largely managed using SSH through things like IPMI ports and other things where you can log in, install an operating system remotely. It's the virtualization platforms, particularly when provisioning is automated, are largely managed using SSH internally with scripts. The operating systems that run on those platforms, particularly if they are Unix or Linux-based, are typically managed remotely over SSH. That's what's enabling the data centers to be in a different location than the admins, and it's enabling outsourcing system administration into faraway locations and so on. It's being used on the application layer for file transfers, for application integration, for all sorts of things.
I want to pick you up on one thing that was in there. It's somewhat astonishing, particularly for the folks out there who know about security, that you knew nothing about cryptography, picked up a book and made something that worked, because crypto is so hard. How much help did you eventually get with the difficult things there? Did other folks come in and say, oh, you need to use this cipher instead? Did the US government come in and say, you need to use this instead?
It's not that hard. Any competent programmer can learn to write cryptographic software in a few months. That's why it's so ridiculous that some people want to allow the honest people only use controlled crypto, because those who want to use unbreakable encryption can hire any competent programmer to do it, to implement it for them in a few months. And the information's been out for 30 years, and it's not going to go away. So it's just not going to go away.
Yep.
And I think encryption is a key component in any network engineer's toolbox. It's the only way to provide security when you go over a network. It has to be encrypted. And it's cheap nowadays. A single processor core encrypts easily several gigabytes per second. It's fast enough for almost all applications not to matter. And if I think, how dependent are we on the information systems? Retail. You couldn't buy anything if the information system at the retail chain didn't work. The cashiers wouldn't be able to work. Logistics wouldn't work. Supply chain wouldn't work. The whole logistics industry. Take a company like FedEx with 9,000 programmers only building internal applications for their use. They are so dependent on information systems for optimizing their operations. Take banks. All the account balances are electronic. Your stock holdings are electronic. Go to the government. Your land holdings, your real estate holdings are electronic. Your tax records, your health information, all electronic. Even the military heavily depends on information systems. The world as we know would go down if those systems stopped working. And sometimes I like to say that because SSH is used for managing so many of those systems on so many layers, I like to say that SSH keeps the world running.
Right.
And there's a good amount of truth in it.
Yeah. And if everything is running on that, does that mean it is safe? Are there still worries that you have about that?
It's pretty good. First time I did the protocol, I did okay, but I didn't do great. And that's the reason why there was SSH2. SSH1, I still don't actually know how to break it. But there are certain cryptographic issues that I didn't understand at that time that made me sleep badly at night. So we developed SSH2, which, as far as I know, is good. And in these things, you can never know. But according to the best civilian available information, it's good.
And presumably, if it is used everywhere, it is thoroughly tested regularly because everyone is trying to break it.
Yeah.
If you were to crack one part of that, you have a lot of power.
And every military I know anything about uses it as well. So probably they also think it's pretty good. But now, as all the traffic is encrypted, there are some problematic topics. One of them is that it's kind of difficult to inspect the traffic at the firewall. And as more and more traffic becomes encrypted, it's harder and harder to do antivirus at firewall, data loss prevention at firewall, see what consultants are doing when they come into the organization, get visibility into internal traffic within the organization, do intrusion detection, things like network monitoring tools that record the packets and connections become kind of less useful when it's all encrypted. Now, this was something that I and others at SSH started working on about 5 years ago. And we built a product, it's called Crypto Auditor, which actually can decrypt SSH sessions with the help of gaining access to the server keys. So we also have a key management tool, and using those together, we can gain visibility into the encrypted traffic at a firewall, internal firewalls, or in front of internal servers. So one thing we work with is access from external consultants into the network, putting that next to the firewall, being able to direct the traffic through Crypto Auditor so that we can record all the connections and index them, play them back later, so we get visibility into sysadmin actions, whether it's SSH or remote desktop or something else. But so access to encrypted connections is one of those tricky issues that need to be addressed one way or the other, because we also sometimes need access. But there's a huge difference in a government or an unknown number of governments or hackers or the mafia having access to all your data and communications and passwords, as opposed to the organization itself in a controlled manner having access to it. So I believe in enabling organizations to have access to the data, but it has to be something that they can audit who has access and control it.
When you say those tools, are they like SSH? Are they something the organization installs itself? Are we talking as a service cloud design here?
So an organization can install itself, but it's also for cloud service providers. So in a cloud service environment, there's the question of managing the cloud infrastructure itself. How do we guarantee to customers and the cloud service provider that the cloud itself is secure and properly managed? So that's one use case. But another use case is that it actually can be offered as a service to customers. So it's possible to install that as a virtual machine in front of a customer's servers and direct all of the customers' system administration traffic, whether it's to Windows servers or Linux servers or something else, through that, through crypto auditor, so that it gets recorded, indexed, it can be searched later, you can generate alerts if there's something funny going on, and you can play back the session like a video as if you were sitting behind the person's screen afterwards. So I think that's a powerful tool that gives value to value to service providers as well.
We were talking earlier about SSH keys. You were telling me was there an audit or a research study into that?
Yeah.
It's like the numbers you quoted at me were astonishing.
Yeah. So the more technical of you probably know public key authentication in SSH. So with SSH, I introduced a new authentication method, which uses cryptographic keys, essentially a key pair consisting of a private key and a public key. And that can be used for authentication, and it's a way to automate things. You don't need a password to log in to a server. And it's sometimes people use it interactively with a passphrase used to encrypt the private key. But very widely, more widely than I ever imagined. Never in my wildest dreams could I imagine people would start using that on a scale at which it's actually today being used. So people use it for automation, automating file transfers, for application integration, integrating information systems, business administrations, business applications, transferring data from one application to another, from a trading system into an accounting system, e-commerce to accounting, accounting to reporting, to audit, to business planning, all sorts of things. And when we go to larger organizations, they've got thousands of applications. A typical bank has something like 4,000 plus minus a few thousand applications that they run in their environments. Many of those are absolutely business critical. If they fail, the organization goes down. Now, we just completed a project with one of the top 10 banks in the world. We had 10 people on site in New York for 3 years. And we went through some 500 of the most critical applications. That covered about 15,000 servers in the environment. We found 3 million authorized keys in that environment. 3 million authorized keys, granting access to the production servers, same as usernames and passwords. This is an organization with something between 100 and 200,000 employees. So they have approximately, let's say, 200,000 usernames and passwords. And then they have 3 million SSH keys. This is not an exception. We've done audits with multiple financial institutions, some companies in other fields. With major financial institutions, we found anywhere from 750,000 to 4.5 million SSH keys in the environment. That is 5 to 50 times as many SSH keys granting access to their production servers as they have usernames and passwords. Now, if you think of identity and access management, which is about controlling who's given access to their servers, provisioning access, onboarding, terminating access or offboarding, all the compliance requirements in different industries and just good business practice, it starts from controlling who's given access to your systems. If you don't control who's given legitimate access to your systems, there's no security, because anybody can get access and do anything. It starts from controlling who has access. With that bank, 90% of those SSH keys were never used. We monitored the whole environment. And 90% of the keys were never used. They were access credentials that hadn't been properly terminated. And we are talking about one of the world's most security-conscious organizations in one of the most IT-intensive, security-conscious industries in the world. And it seems it's more or less the same in every major IT environment. Now, people who do identity and access management, for the last 20 years, they've focused on usernames, passwords, two-factor authentication, integration into HR systems and such. They didn't know of SSH keys. SSH keys grew out of system administrator domain. Sysadmins installed SSH keys whenever it was convenient to automate things. An Oracle administrator may not want to go through a privileged access management product, say CyberArk. That's pretty cumbersome to use. They don't want to log into that portal because it just complicates their work and makes life difficult. So instead, they installed SSH keys to have direct access to those Oracle servers.
I have literally done that before. I have literally been one of the people stymied by a sysadmin. Go, can we just do SSH? And without their knowledge, it's easier if we just SSH in and stick a key on there. And they never knew. It's 3 years later and no one ever found out. We did delete it afterwards, but
most people didn't delete.
It was the only way to get the job.
It hasn't been audited, it hasn't been controlled, there'd been no policy in many organizations, and that's how they eventually just accumulated. People left, their keys were never removed. One of our guys, actually one of our pre-sales engineers, left a company, it's a healthcare organization, 10 years ago. And now he visited them as a consultant and found his keys still worked after 10 years of being away.
Does anyone out there recognize that situation, by the way? Has anyone? Yeah, right, yeah, that's the most hands I've seen in a while.
So if I look at the identity and access management field, that's an established field in information security. They missed 90% of the problem. Somehow, they managed to miss 90% of the credentials. Most larger companies have invested millions, even tens of millions, in identity and access management problems or projects, and they missed 90% of the problem. Now, that is changing. Auditors are looking into keys now. Consultants are recommending looking into it. It's changing. It's going to take several years. You can imagine having 10 people on site at the bank was not cheap for them. But we successfully solved their problem. People could lose their banking licenses, could face major penalties in credit card payment processing, and it's just a systemic risk to the society because we are so dependent on all those information systems in retail, in banking, in logistics, in refineries, in government, in military, that if those systems go down, the society could go down. There'd be chaos in a week. And if you think of having 3 million keys on 15,000 servers, now that's a lot of outgoing connections on the average from each server. Now assume you can break into a server using some kind of malware or other attack, or just being a rogue sysadmin.
I don't know what's happened to the lighting. We'll just keep going.
I guess that was at 5-minute mark.
It hasn't happened for anyone else. That, I think, there we go. Thank you, folks. Do carry on.
But imagine somebody getting in, and people do get in all the time. Viruses do get in all the time. What happens, these keys may remove the defense in depth that you would normally have. You get into one server. On the average, that has connections to a dozen other servers. The likelihood is you'll be able to continue the attack from several of those other servers. And there's actually code on GitHub for doing this. And there'll be multiple instances of malware that have collected SSH keys.
So what should the folks out here do? What's your advice for cracking down on this, for auditing this kind of thing?
So I've worked for the last, well, I actually wrote code for the last year and a half around SSH key management. We do have a product on this. It's called Universal SSH Key Management. There's also a free tool called Health Check for just scanning your environment to see how many keys you have and which keys have the widest access in your environment and so on. But so I've been deeply involved in this field for the last four plus years. And I can say it was painful to do that project with one of the world's most complicated IT environments. We did it. And while we did it, we developed a product to help doing that. It's a generic tool for helping with those projects. And if you have 3 million keys, you cannot spend 2 hours per key figuring out which of them actually are needed. So you have to cut down the number as quickly as possible. So we do things like monitor the environment using log data, syslog and so on, to identify which keys are actually being used. We can cut down the number often by 90%. 300,000 keys is still a lot if you have to spend 2 hours per key to talk to the application teams to figure out which ones are still used. Then we can identify things like keys that lead from test and development systems into production. Now that's a major separation of duties issue. Or keys that lead from anywhere into financial systems which contain a publicly listed company's financial data, that's insider information. Or health data, or credit card payment systems. So we can identify connections that cross boundaries that they shouldn't cross. That's another quick win, to eliminate all those keys. Another quick win is to eliminate keys that lead from interactive accounts into service accounts. Now, most companies with sane policies do not allow the Oracle administrators to log in direct from their personal account into the Oracle account, because those are the most critical databases in the organizations. Now, there are tools that make that privilege access control more easier, like CryptoReader is a nice tool for that. But so you eliminate those connections. Again, a quick win. And you are left with typically tens of thousands, or in smaller organizations, some thousands or hundreds of connections that you can then go through by hand. And we actually give visibility into where do these connections come from, where do they lead to, which ones have from stanzas on the keys, which ones have common restrictions, and so on. So that's how we can help resolve these issues. But I think SSH keys is one of the big things that need to be addressed in the coming years, and one of the biggest security risks in in large organizations. It's a management risk. It's not a problem of the product or protocol. It's a management issue. They just were not managed, as if your usernames and passwords were never managed.
And I think that's a message we have to leave folks with. Ladies and gentlemen, can we have an enormous round of applause, please, for the inventor of SSH, Tatu Ylönen. I'm going to leave it. There we go. Thank you very much for your time. I'm going to see you off the stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'll be at the exhibition near the Internet Lounge at booth G11 for tonight. So if you want to come to meet me or talk, please, you're welcome.
Thank you once again.